You can't leave. The clerk whispered it, but the sound hit harder than a shout ever could. I was standing at the counter inside a federal building, clutching $12 and an eviction notice, just trying to get a passport stamp so I could take a janitor job. Instead of approval, the space between us lit up with a harsh, pulsing red. A silent alarm began flashing on the wall, spinning like something out of a nightmare. 2 armed guards immediately moved closer, their hands resting on their holsters. "Ma'am," the clerk said, her voice shaking as badly as her hands. "This social security number belongs to a child who died in 1991. The room tipped sideways. Dead. That didn't make sense. I was standing right there breathing. But before I could say a word, the elevator doors slid open behind me. A man in a crisp black suit stepped out and walked straight through the armed perimeter like the building belonged to him. He didn't spare the guards a glance. His eyes locked onto mine, and what I saw there scared me more than the guns ever could. Recognition. He stopped about 2 feet away and said 3 words that wiped out everything I thought I was. "Welcome back, Evan. If you discovered your entire life was built on a lie, would you run? Or would you stay and try to figure out who you really are?" I didn't get thrown into a holding cell. No one shackled me to a cold metal table bolted into the floor. Instead, the man in the suit, Mr. Whitman, guided me into a quiet, soundproof office that smelled like leather and expensive coffee. He didn't read me my rights. He calmly poured a glass of ice water and placed it on the mahogany desk with a care that felt strange to me. "Drink," he said gently. "You're in shock." I picked up the glass, my hands shaking so badly that the ice clinked against the rim. I was 32 years old. For 14 years I'd scrubbed floors, waited tables, and dodged eviction notices, convinced I was nothing more than the unwanted stepdaughter of a small-town sheriff. I believed I was Lena, the mistake, the burden, the problem nobody wanted. Whitman slid a file folder toward me. He didn't open it right away. He just rested his hand on top. "We've been searching for you for 30 years, Evan," he said quietly. When he opened the folder, there wasn't a mugshot inside. Instead, I saw a digital age progression image of a young woman. She had my eyes, my jaw, my exact nose. But she didn't look worn down. She didn't look broken. She looked loved. "That's what you would have looked like if you hadn't been taken," he said. Then he told me the truth. My real name was Evan Carter. My family had built their fortune in Texas oil, but they'd give every well they owned just to see that face again. I had been kidnapped from a park in 1991. The room started to spin. I gripped the arms of the leather chair to keep myself grounded. Kidnapped. The word should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like a lock finally clicking open. Something I'd been struggling with my whole life without realizing it. Suddenly, everything made sense. I thought about Thomas, the man I called my stepfather, the sheriff who told me I was trash. The man who made me sleep on a cot in the laundry room while his biological daughter, Claire, lived in the master bedroom. I always thought he hated me because I was difficult or unlovable. But that wasn't it. He hated me because I was evidence. I was a crime scene. The tears came fast and hot. I wasn't crying out of fear. I was crying because of the crushing relief. I wasn't broken. I wasn't a burden. I was something stolen, something valuable that someone had tried to discard. Whitman seemed to get it. He slid a sleek black phone across the desk toward me. "Your parents, your real parents, are on a private jet," he said. "They'll be landing at the executive airport in 20 minutes. You're safe here, Evan. This is federal property. No one can touch you." I stared at the phone. Felt like a lifeline. For the first time in my life, the ground under my feet felt solid. I wasn't the girl clutching an eviction notice anymore. I was Evan Carter, and I was finally going home. I reached for the phone, my finger hovering over the screen, ready to make the call that would end the nightmare. I let my guard down. I let myself believe the fight was over. That was my mistake. The door didn't just open, it blew inward. I didn't even have time to scream. 2 uniformed deputies rushed in, hands on their weapons, boots pounding against the polished floor. And behind them, walking in like he owned the place, was Thomas. He wasn't wearing his usual stained flannel. He stood there in his full sheriff's dress uniform, the star on his chest shining under the lights. He didn't look at Whitman. He stared straight at me, and his eyes weren't angry. They were empty. "Step away from the suspect," he barked. Whitman immediately stood up and placed himself between me and the deputies. "This is a federal investigation, Sheriff. You don't have jurisdiction here." Thomas didn't even blink. He slapped a folded paper onto the desk. "I've got a warrant signed by a county judge 10 minutes ago," he said. "Grand larceny. Felony charges." He pointed at me. The same finger that had jabbed into my chest 1,000 times growing up. That woman stole $50,000 worth of diamond jewelry from my wife's bedroom before she fled this morning. I'm taking her into custody." "That's a lie," I shouted, the shock finally cracking. "I haven't been to your house in years." "Save it for the judge," Thomas sneered. Then he nodded at his deputies. "Cuff her." One of them grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back so hard my shoulder popped. Pain exploded through me and I cried out as the handcuffs snapped shut. Whitman moved forward, his hand going to his jacket, but Thomas stepped in close, chest to chest with him. "Careful, Agent," Thomas warned softly, his voice low and dangerous. "This is a state crime under exigent circumstances. Unless you want to obstruct a felony arrest, you'll step aside. You can question her after we process her at the county jail." Whitman hesitated. I could see the math running through his head. He knew the law. He knew that a local felony warrant could override federal custody if they claimed I was a flight risk. And Thomas knew it too. He was using the system like a weapon. Cold steel bit into my wrists as the cuffs tightened. The sharp click of the lock echoed like a gunshot. "I didn't steal anything," I begged, looking straight at Whitman. "Please don't let him take me. You said I was safe." Whitman's face was tight with anger, but he didn't pull his weapon. He couldn't just start a gunfight with local law enforcement inside a federal building over a property crime. That was the line Whitman couldn't cross, and Thomas knew it. He had played this perfectly. Thomas tightened his grip on my arm until I knew bruises would bloom. He leaned in close, his breath burning against my ear, and dropped his voice so only I could hear him. "I warned you," he whispered, venom thick in every word. "I told you never to dig. I told you to leave it alone. Now you're going to die in a holding cell. You'll hang yourself with a bedsheet before your rich parents even touch the runway." The blood drained straight out of me. He wasn't taking me to jail to process me. He was taking me there to kill me. "Move," he barked, jerking me toward the exit. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, fluorescent lights smearing together as the deputies half-dragged, half-marched me toward the elevators. My boots slid across the polished linoleum. Thomas's hand clamped around my bicep, fingers digging into that soft, vulnerable space between muscle and bone. I knew that grip. I had always known that grip. This wasn't the first time he'd marched me out of a door. The federal hallway vanished, and suddenly I was 18 again, standing on the porch of the only house I'd ever called home. Rain poured down as I clutched a garbage bag stuffed with my clothes. I wasn't shaking from the cold. I was shaking because I had nowhere to go. Through the bay window I could see them inside. Thomas and his biological daughter Claire, sitting down to dinner. They were cutting into thick, bloody steaks. The chandelier cast a warm yellow glow over crystal glasses and polished silverware. Earlier, I'd eaten a cold sandwich made from the heel of a bread loaf, because Thomas said steak was for people who contributed. I remembered knocking on the glass, begging to come back in just for the night. Thomas had opened the door and loomed over me then, the same way he was towering over me now. "You should be on your knees thanking me," he'd said, his voice soaked in that smug, self-righteous poison. "I kept a roof over your head for 10 years. I fed you. I clothed you. And you weren't even my blood. Do you have any idea what a burden you were, Lena? Do you know how expensive it is to keep a mistake?" And I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. I dropped to my knees on that wet concrete and thanked him for the scraps he threw me. I carried that debt for 14 years, convinced I was unworthy, convinced I owed the world an apology just for breathing. But that was the trap. The realization hit harder than the handcuffs biting into my wrists. It hadn't been charity. It had been camouflage. He wasn't raising a stepdaughter. He was hiding a witness. Every time he made me feel small, every time he told me I was lucky he didn't toss me onto the street, he was shaping me, training me to be grateful for my own cage. He needed me broken so I wouldn't ask questions. He needed me desperate so I'd never look too closely at my own birth certificate. He wasn't my savior. He was my warden. The fear that had been choking me since I walked into that building didn't fade away. It burned up completely, wiped out by a white-hot surge of pure, clarifying rage. He thought he was dragging a scared little girl to jail. He thought he was handling Lena the burden. But Lena didn't exist anymore. I dug my heels into the floor. Instead of fighting the deputy's grip, I went completely limp and let my full body weight drop. It's a trick you learn when you've had to move heavy furniture by yourself. Dead weight is almost impossible to control. The sudden drop threw them off. The deputy on my left stumbled, his grip slipping, and we came to a jerking stop about 10 feet from the elevator doors. "Get up," Thomas snarled, yanking on my arm. "Stop making a scene." I didn't move. Slowly, I planted my feet and straightened my spine, pulling against the cuffs until the chain went tight. Then I turned my head and looked straight into Thomas's eyes. For the first time in my life I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I didn't shrink. I stared at the man who had stolen my life, and let him see exactly what he'd created. The victim was gone. The witness was awake, and she was about to burn his world down. Check the timestamp. My scream ripped through the lobby, slamming into the marble walls like a gunshot. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a command. The deputies froze, glancing down at me, confusion flashing across their faces. That single heartbeat of hesitation was all I needed. I didn't try to stand. Instead, I locked eyes with Whitman, who was running toward us, his hand reaching for the radio on his shoulder. The warrant! I shouted, my voice shaking but loud. Check the time he signed it. Thomas kicked my leg hard. Shut her up. Get her in the elevator. Too late. Whitman didn't slow down. He didn't stop to ask questions. He threw his body against the elevator doors just as they were sliding shut, forcing them back open with a screech of metal. 2 Federal Protective Service officers appeared instantly from the security checkpoint, hands on their weapons, blocking Thomas's path. Hold it! Whitman barked. Gone was the calm, reassuring voice from the office. This was the voice of a man who ran federal task forces. Nobody moves. This is obstruction of justice. I am a sheriff. Thomas roared, sweat pouring down his face. I am executing a lawful arrest. Let me see the warrant, Whitman said, holding out his hand. He didn't ask. He waited. Thomas hesitated, clutching the paper to his chest for just a second. A tell, the kind you see in a bad poker player. Then, with 3 federal guns aimed in his general direction, he shoved the crumpled document at Whitman. Read it and weep, he sneered. Grand larceny. Signed by Judge Reynolds this morning. Whitman snapped the paper open and scanned it once. Then he glanced up at the digital clock above the security desk. After that, he looked at the security monitors lining the wall. You're sloppy, Thomas, Whitman said quietly, his voice dropping into something cold and lethal. He turned the warrant so the deputies could see it. This was signed at exactly 8 a.m. Then he pointed to the security monitor. But my building's cameras show Lena entering through the north metal detectors at 7:45. The entire lobby went dead silent. She's been in federal custody from the moment she walked through those doors, Whitman said, stepping closer to Thomas. Unless she suddenly learned how to teleport, there's no way she stole jewelry from your house at 8 o'clock if she was standing in my lobby 15 minutes earlier. The deputies gripping my arms loosened immediately. They glanced at each other, then back at Thomas. The truth was sinking in. They weren't carrying out an arrest, they were helping with an abduction happening in real time. It's a typo, Thomas shouted, spit flying as he spoke. The clerk screwed up the time. She stole it last night. The warrant says this morning, Whitman shot back. And if you lied on a sworn affidavit to get it signed, that's perjury. If you're trying to remove a federal witness using fabricated charges, that's kidnapping. Whitman motioned to his guards. Release her. Now. The deputies let go of me like I was burning them. I scrambled backward across the marble floor, putting as much space as I could between myself and the man who had stolen my life. Thomas stood alone at the center of the circle. His face was twisted with purple rage. He looked at his deputies retreating. He looked at Whitman, who met his stare with icy contempt. Then he looked at me, standing now, rubbing my bruised wrists, no longer the frightened girl he could bully into silence. That's when he realized it. He couldn't talk his way out of this. His badge meant nothing here. I'm not leaving without her, Thomas screamed. His hand shot to his belt. He didn't reach for his service weapon. He knew that would get him killed on the spot. Instead, he yanked out his taser, the bright yellow casing glaring under the lobby lights, and aimed it straight at Whitman. Back off, he yelled, his voice cracking. I'm taking custody of this suspect. Anyone who interferes gets dropped. He was out of his mind, holding a federal agent at weapon point inside a federal building. But when I looked into his eyes wide and frantic, I understood something chilling. He wasn't trying to arrest me anymore. He knew it was over. He was just trying to survive the next 5 minutes. The response was instant. 3 Glock 17s came up, all trained on Thomas's chest. Drop the weapon, Whitman ordered. For a second it looked like Thomas might force them to shoot him out of pure spite. Then the madness drained from his face. He wasn't a martyr, just a bully. He let the taser fall, clattering against the marble floor, and raised his hands. Fine, he sneered. Let's do this the right way. Then he reached into his jacket. The guard stiffened, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a document and snapped it open with practiced flair. You got me, Thomas said lightly. The warrant was fake. I knew about the kidnapping. I helped cover it up. He looked straight at me and smiled. I kept you. I hid you. I stole your life. Whitman stepped forward with handcuffs. That's a confession. You're under arrest. Thomas laughed. No, I'm not. Check the calendar. The kidnapping happened in 1991. The statute of limitations ran out in 2011. The room went silent. Whitman didn't move. Thomas seized the moment. You can't touch me for kidnapping or fraud. I walk. And legally, you're still incompetent. I control your assets. He turned toward the exit. I'm suing all of you. You're right about the statute, Whitman said calmly, stopping him mid-step. But you forgot one rule. Thomas frowned. Which rule? Whitman lifted a thick file. The constructive trust doctrine. You don't own property obtained through fraud. You hold it in trust for the victim. The file hit the bench with a heavy thud. We traced the ransom payments, the foster stipends, the investments. That's my money. Thomas snapped. No, I said, stepping forward. You just managed it for me. Whitman's voice was ice cold. Civil fraud doesn't expire when the victim was a minor. Your assets are frozen. Your house is seized. Your accounts now belong to the victim. He pointed at me. It all belongs to Evan. Thomas staggered back, fear flashing across his face. Not fear of prison, but terror at losing everything. But I'm the sheriff. You laundered money and filed false tax returns. Whitman cut in. Those clocks are still ticking. The guards moved in. Thomas screamed as the cuffs snapped shut. You're nothing, I whispered. The lobby went quiet. Whitman slid a document across the desk toward me. Asset transfer authorization. Sell it, I said as I signed. Just make sure he never goes back. I had nothing left, but I was free. Sunlight poured into the lobby as two figures rushed toward me. I didn't need proof. I felt it deep in my bones. Evan, the woman whispered. I'm here. They held me like they'd never let go. For the first time in my life.